Your computer is watching you right now, not metaphorically, not as some distant future warning. Right now, tonight, as you sit in front of your screen, every website you visit, every message you type, every document you open, every password you enter, it is being captured, automatically, silently, without asking you once. And the terrifying part? This is not a hacker doing this. This is not a virus. This is the company whose software you have trusted for decades. This is Microsoft. And this, right here, is where the story begins. The story of how your own PC became the most sophisticated surveillance device in your home. And more importantly, the story of the one exit door that still exists before that door closes permanently. Because there is an exit, there always has been. It is free. It runs on your old laptop that Windows already abandoned. It does not take screenshots of your screen. It does not require you to buy a new $1,500 machine just to stay protected. It gives you back something you did not even realize you had lost. Complete, total ownership of your own computer. That exit has a name. It is called Linux. And by the time this video ends, you will understand exactly why millions of people are walking through that door right now, and why the window to do so freely is closing faster than most people realize. But first, you need to understand the trap, because you cannot escape something you do not fully see. Let us go back to May 2024. Microsoft stood on a stage and announced something they called Recall. They described it as a photographic memory for your PC. The idea sounded genuinely impressive. Your computer would take automatic screenshots of your screen every few seconds, build a searchable database from those images, and then let you search your own digital history in plain language. You could ask your PC, "What was that Blue Shoe website I visited 3 weeks ago?" And it would show you, instantly, like magic. The audience clapped. Tech journalists wrote excited articles. Microsoft stock moved. Everything seemed fine. And then the security researchers got their hands on it. Within days, not weeks, days, the reaction shifted from excitement to something closer to horror. Because when researchers actually looked at what Recall was doing under the surface, what they found was not a helpful memory tool. What they found was one of the most invasive features ever shipped inside a mainstream operating system. Here is what Recall was actually doing. Every 3 to 5 seconds, it captured a full screenshot of your screen. Everything. Your online banking session, captured. Your private Signal messages, the ones marked as disappearing, captured. Your WhatsApp conversations, captured. And then here is the part that made security experts go completely silent for a moment before they started writing very alarmed blog posts. Your passwords. The ones that websites normally hide behind those small black dots so nobody can read them over your shoulder. And Recall captured those too. Because Recall does not filter. Microsoft themselves confirmed this in their own documentation. Their exact words, and this is Microsoft writing this, not a critic, were, "Recall does not perform content moderation. It will not hide information such as passwords or financial account numbers." Read that sentence again, slowly. Your own computer, the machine sitting on your desk, the machine you paid for, was taking screenshots of your passwords and storing them in a local database on your hard drive, yes, but in a location that any malware, any hacker, who gained even limited access to your system could potentially harvest in one single move. Months of your entire digital life, every site, every message, every financial transaction, sitting in one searchable place. Cybersecurity researcher Kevin Beaumont, someone who has spent years documenting Microsoft's security failures, not a random blogger, compared Recall directly to InfoStealer malware, the kind of malicious software that criminals specifically designed to steal your saved passwords from browsers. He called Recall a goldmine, not for users, for attackers. Wired magazine, one of the most respected technology publications in the world, described Recall as unrequested, pre-installed spyware built into new Windows computers. Privacy organizations moved immediately. The UK's Data Protection Authority, the ICO, launched a formal inquiry into Microsoft, asking one very direct question: how exactly did you assess user privacy before deciding to ship this feature to hundreds of millions of people? Signal, the encrypted messaging app, added a specific screen security feature to their desktop application that blocks Recall from capturing Signal conversations by default. Brave browser blocked it. AdGuard blocked it. The public reaction was so intense, so unified, so angry, that Microsoft did something they almost never do. They blinked. The launch was postponed, then delayed again, then delayed again. When it finally arrived in limited form in December 2024, it was opt-in only, meaning you had to actively turn it on. That was a real victory for users. But here is what that victory does not change. The fact that Microsoft built this, that they thought this was acceptable, that their vision for your PC's future involves your screen being photographed thousands of times per day. That is the vision. Recall being opt-in today does not mean it stays opt-in tomorrow. and that matters more than most people are currently discussing. Because recall is not a glitch. It is not an experiment that went wrong. It is a preview, a window into exactly what Windows 12 is designed to be. Now, Microsoft has not officially announced Windows 12, no confirmed name, no official release date, no official hardware requirements published publicly, but in December 2025, internal documents leaked, and those documents told a very specific story. According to those leaked materials, Windows 12 will require a neural processing unit, an NPU, with a performance rating above 45 TOPS. TOPS stands for tera operations per second. It is a measurement of how many AI calculations a chip can perform in 1 second. 45 TOPS is a very specific number. It is a number that only a handful of processors currently on the market can hit. Intel's Core Ultra 200 series, Arrow Lake. AMD's Ryzen 8000 and 9000 series. The specific Copilot Plus PCs that Microsoft has already been heavily promoting and pushing retailers to stock. That is it. That is the list. If your PC was built before late 2023, regardless of how powerful it is, regardless of how much RAM it has, regardless of whether it runs every application you need at full speed today, you will not qualify. The AI features of Windows 12 will not work on your machine. And based on what happened with Windows 11, AI features won't work. Will very quickly become, your PC is not supported, which will then become, your PC will not receive security updates, which will then become, please buy a new computer. This is the cycle, and it is not accidental. To understand how deliberate this cycle is, you need to look at what just happened with Windows 10. October 14th, 2025. That was the official end-of-life date. Security updates stopped. Bug fixes stopped. Microsoft's support officially ended. And the machines left behind were not old, broken, struggling computers. A research firm called Canalys, a legitimate market analysis company, estimated that 240 million PCs were running Windows 10, but could not upgrade to Windows 11. 240 million. Some of these machines were only 4 or 5 years old. Many had 8 GB of RAM, decent processors, fast SSDs. They worked perfectly. But they did not have TPM 2.0, a specific security chip that Microsoft decided to make mandatory for Windows 11, and so they were declared incompatible. A retired benefits manager named Peter Volin, living in the San Francisco Bay Area, had one of these machines. His PC worked fine. His son came to visit, checked the PC, and told him that after October 2025, the computer would no longer be safe to use. Peter went out and bought a new PC, $1,500. His own words were simple and honest. He said it was money he had planned to spend in 2 or 3 years. But Microsoft's timeline forced it now. Multiply Peter's story by 240 million machines. That is the scale of what just happened. And what is about to happen again with Windows 12's NPU requirement will make the Windows 11 transition look small. Researchers have estimated that those 240 million machines, if disposed of, would create enough e-waste to stack beyond the moon by 372 miles. The recoverable metals inside them, gold, copper, silver, platinum, have a combined estimated value of $2.4 billion, all of it potentially becoming landfill. Not because the machines stopped working, but because a company in Redmond, Washington, decided that a chip they did not previously require is now mandatory. And for the people who cannot afford a new PC, Microsoft offered extended security updates for Windows 10 for individual users, $30 per year. For businesses, $61 per device per year, doubling annually to a maximum of $244 per device. This is not support. This is a subscription to delay the inevitable, while paying Microsoft for the privilege of being stuck. This is what a locked ecosystem looks like when it fully activates. You do not own your PC, you rent access to it, and the rent goes up on Microsoft's schedule, not yours. Now here's where the story changes direction. Because while all of this was happening, the recall backlash, the Windows 10 end of life, the 240 million abandoned machines, the leaked Windows 12 requirements, something else was happening quietly in a corner of the internet that most mainstream tech coverage almost entirely ignored. Linux was growing fast, historically fast. In 2020, Linux had roughly 1.5% of the global desktop market. By 2022, it was at 2.76%. By 2023, 3.12%. By 2024, 4.44%. And then in June 2025, for the first time in history, Linux crossed 5% desktop market share in the United States. According to StatCounter's data, Linux reached 5.03% in the US market. That number sounds small until you understand what it represents in terms of momentum. It took Linux almost 2 decades to go from essentially 0 to 1%. It took another 2 years to reach 2%. It took 2.2 years to get from 2% to 3%. From 3% to 4% took only 0.7 years. From 4% to 5%, almost the same speed. The curve is accelerating. Something shifted. Multiple things shifted at once, and they shifted at exactly the same time as the Windows backlash reached its peak. That is not a coincidence. That is millions of ordinary people making a rational decision. India tells an even more striking story. Linux desktop share in India sits at 16.21%, the highest of any major economy in the world. Germany's state of Schleswig-Holstein announced plans to migrate 30,000 government computers from Windows to Linux. The European Union has begun internal discussions about an EU Linux, a Linux-based operating system for member states' government systems. 72% of Fortune 500 companies run their mission-critical workloads on Linux. More than 96% of the world's top web servers run Linux. Every single one of the world's 500 fastest supercomputers runs Linux, every single one. And gaming, the one area where Linux was always considered completely hopeless, is changing faster than anyone predicted. Valve's Steam gaming platform released a survey in October 2025 showing Linux at 3.05% of all active Steam users. In October 2024, it was 2%. That is over 52% growth in 12 months. Valve's Proton technology, which allows Windows games to run on Linux without any modification, has transformed compatibility. The Steam Deck, Valve's handheld gaming device that runs Arch Linux, has put Linux in the hands of millions of gamers who never would have chosen it themselves. And many of them discovered that it works well, and that it does not report back to anyone. The Stack Overflow Developer Survey 2025 found that 27.8% of developers use Ubuntu, a Linux distribution, for personal use. 27.7% use it professionally. These are not hobbyists. These are the people who build the software that runs the modern world. So what is Linux exactly, for someone who has only ever used Windows? Linux is an operating system, just like Windows, but built on a fundamentally different philosophy. Windows is a product. It is owned by Microsoft. Every decision about what it does, what it costs, what features it has, when it stops being supported, those decisions are made by one company for one purpose, which is profit. Linux is not a product in that sense. It is a piece of software built by tens of thousands of contributors. Individuals, universities, corporations like Intel, AMD, Google, IBM, all working on a shared code base that nobody owns and everybody can use. The Linux kernel alone has 34.1 million lines of code and 11,089 contributors from 1,180 different organizations. This is not a garage project. This is the most tested, most deployed, most battle-hardened operating system code ever written. But here is the part that matters for a normal person sitting at home. Linux? Today is not what it was 10 years ago. The version of Linux that frustrated early adopters in 2010 or 2015, the one where you had to type cryptic commands into a black terminal screen to install a Wi-Fi driver. That version is largely a memory. Today's Linux distributions, particularly Linux Mint, Ubuntu, Pop.os, and Fedora, install the same way Windows does. You download an image, create a bootable USB drive, follow an on-screen installer, and your computer is ready. Drivers install automatically. Wi-Fi connects automatically. Bluetooth works. Your display resolution is correct. No manual configuration required for a standard setup. The software ecosystem has matured enormously. There's a software center, like an app store, where you install applications with one click. Firefox, Chrome, LibreOffice, VLC, Spotify, Steam, Discord, Zoom, all available. YouTube works in your browser. Netflix works in your browser. Spotify has a native Linux application. The gap between things I can do on Windows and things I can do on Linux for an average user has narrowed to a point where most people would not feel it in their daily use. And performance? This is where Linux genuinely surprises people who switch from Windows. Intel published internal benchmark data showing that on their own Lunar Lake laptops, certain tasks ran up to 20% faster on Linux than on Windows. AMD's Radeon 888M integrated graphics showed up to 50% better performance in some GPU tests on Linux compared to Windows. For older machines specifically, laptops that felt sluggish on Windows 10, Linux Mint routinely delivers 30 to 40% better responsiveness. Not because of magic, because Linux simply does not carry the weight of all the telemetry, all the background services, all the AI processes that Windows loads by default. Your hardware does actual work instead of reporting to Microsoft. And on Linux, no recall. No screenshots of your passwords, no AI assistant watching your screen, no background process sending usage data back to a corporation, no mandatory features you cannot turn off. You decide what runs on your computer. That is a sentence that sounds obvious until you realize it no longer applies to Windows users by default. Now, and this is important, Linux is not perfect. Saying Linux has no limitations would be misleading, and misleading you helps nobody. Microsoft Office does not run natively on Linux. Word, Excel, PowerPoint, you cannot install them. LibreOffice is a capable alternative for everyday document work. But if your job involves complex Excel macros, highly specific formatting, or deep integration with Microsoft's corporate ecosystem, you will feel the difference. It is manageable for many people. It is a genuine obstacle for some. Adobe's creative software, Photoshop, Premiere Pro, After Effects, Illustrator, none of these run on Linux. There are alternatives. GIMP for photo editing, DaVinci Resolve for video editing, and DaVinci Resolve on Linux is actually quite powerful, used by professional film editors. Kdenlive is a solid free option. But these are different tools with different workflows. If your creative work depends on Adobe's specific tools, switching requires real learning time and possibly some workflow rebuilding. Gaming has improved dramatically, but is not complete. Games that use kernel-level anti-cheat systems, Valorant and PUBG are the notable examples, do not work on Linux. This is because kernel-level anti-cheat requires deep integration with the Windows operating system that Linux cannot replicate. Interestingly, Microsoft itself has been pushing back against kernel-level anti-cheat recently, which may improve the situation in the future. But right now, if Valorant is a game you play regularly, Linux is not your answer today. Hardware compatibility is much better than it was 5 years ago, but is not universal. Certain Wi-Fi adapters, particularly some Broadcom chips, require additional steps to work correctly. Some printers, especially older HP and Canon models, may need manual setup. Most modern hardware works perfectly out of the box, but so most is not all, and checking compatibility before switching is genuinely important. And there is the adjustment period. If you have used Windows for 10 or 15 years, the first 2 to 3 weeks on Linux will feel unfamiliar. Settings are in different places. Some things work slightly differently. Installing software outside the software center works differently. This is real. It fades quickly for most people, but pretending it does not exist would be dishonest. These limitations are real, and they matter, depending on who you are. But here is the comparison that actually clarifies the decision. Not Linux's limitations versus a perfect Windows, but Linux's limitations versus the actual cost of staying on Windows. Not just money cost, the full cost. The financial cost of Windows going forward is becoming significant. A new Copilot Plus PC, the category Microsoft is pushing hardest, starts at around $700 and goes to $2,500 or more for quality options. Windows 10. Extended security updates cost $30 per year for individuals. For businesses, $61 per device per year, doubling annually. These are real numbers that real people and real organizations are paying right now just to continue using machines they already own. The privacy cost is harder to quantify, but is equally real. Recall, maybe opt-in today. Microsoft's history with privacy-adjacent features, telemetry collection that cannot be fully disabled, advertising IDs that follow you across applications, Cortana data collection practices that European regulators challenged, or that history gives reasonable grounds for concern about what opt-in means in practice over a 3 or 5 year period. The researchers and privacy advocates who examined Recall were not paranoid. They were reading the technical documentation and reporting what it said. When a company builds the infrastructure to screenshot your screen thousands of times per day, the question of whether that infrastructure stays opt-in forever is a legitimate question. The control cost is perhaps the most significant of all, even if it is the least talked about. On Windows, you do not decide when your PC becomes obsolete. Microsoft decides. You do not decide which features run in the background of your machine. Microsoft decides. You do not decide when support ends and your security risk begins. Microsoft decides. You are a user of their system, operating within their timeline on their terms. And every new requirement, TPM 2.0 for Windows 11, NPU at 45 tops for Windows 12's AI features, tightens that relationship further. Each cycle, the gap between supported and unsupported catches more machines. Each cycle, the hardware requirement gets more specific. Each cycle, the message gets clearer. You're not a customer, you are a resource. Your data, your usage patterns, your AI-generated behavioral profile. These have value. Your old PC that cannot generate them does not. Linux offers something genuinely different, not just different software, a different relationship with your computer entirely. There is no end-of-life date that forces your hand. Linux Mint has long-term support versions that receive security updates for 5 years, and when that ends, you simply upgrade to the next version at no cost, on your own timeline. There is no company tracking your application usage to build an advertising profile. There is no feature that photographs your screen. There is no mandatory AI integration that requires new hardware. If your PC runs Linux today, it will run Linux in 5 years. If a new version requires hardware you do not have, you stay on the current version, which continues to receive security updates until you choose to upgrade on your own terms. Your computer becomes yours again, not in a romantic or abstract sense. Well, in the most practical, literal sense, The decisions about what that machine does are made by you. So what does a practical path forward actually look like? The first step is honest self-assessment. Think about what you actually do on your PC. If your daily use is web browsing, streaming video, writing documents, email, video calls, and basic photo management, Linux handles all of that today, right now, without any meaningful compromise. You would not miss anything. The switch would be straightforward. If you're a gamer, go to protondb.com before making any decision. This is a community-maintained database where Linux gamers log which Steam games work on Linux and how well. Many thousands of games are rated platinum or gold, meaning they run flawlessly or nearly so. Check your specific library. If your games are there and rated well, why the switch becomes much more viable than you might expect. If Valorant is your main game, wait, or keep a Windows partition for that specific use case. If your work depends heavily on Adobe software or Microsoft Office's more advanced features, consider a dual boot setup, where your computer can start in either Windows or Linux, and you choose at startup. Use Linux for everything you can, and Windows only for the specific professional tools that have no equivalent. This is not a perfect solution, but it is a real one that many people use successfully. For choosing a Linux distribution, the specific version of Linux to install, the recommendations differ by use case, but are not complicated. Linux Mint is the most consistently recommended starting point for Windows users switching for the first time. It looks familiar, it works reliably, and it has excellent documentation and community support. Ubuntu is the most widely used distribution globally and has the largest software library. Pop! UOS from System 76 is particularly well regarded for gaming and creative work. Fedora tends to have the most current software and is favored by developers. Before installing anything on your main machine, there's a zero-risk option that most people do not know about. Every major Linux distribution can run as a live system directly from a USB drive without installing anything, without changing anything on your hard drive, without any risk whatsoever. You download the distribution, write it to a USB drive using a free tool called Balena Etcher or Rufus, restart your computer with the USB plugged in, and your computer boots directly into Linux running from the USB. You can test Wi-Fi, test your display, open the browser, check whether your hardware all works, completely live, completely reversible. Shut down, remove the USB, and your computer goes back to exactly what it was before. This one step removes most of the fear around switching, because it turns what if into, let me just check right now. The trajectory of what is happening is clear, and it is accelerating. Microsoft is building an operating system designed around an AI infrastructure that requires specific new hardware, generates continuous behavioral data, and operates on a subscription-style model where your access to security updates is contingent on your compliance with their upgrade timeline. The features are real, and some of them are genuinely impressive, but the cost, financial, privacy-related, and in terms of control over your own machine, is rising with every iteration. The recall backlash showed that when users understand exactly what is being done with their data, the reaction is immediate and fierce. The problem is that most users never read the documentation. Most users accept defaults, and defaults in Windows are increasingly designed to extract rather than protect. Linux exists as a genuine, practical, increasingly mainstream alternative. The 5% milestone in the United States is not a ceiling. It is an inflection point. The momentum data suggests that the curve continues steepening as more Windows users reach the moment where they must either buy new hardware or find another way. The gaming support, the hardware compatibility, the user-friendly distributions, the performance on older machines, all of these have improved dramatically and continue improving. This is not the Linux of 2010. This is a mature, stable, well-supported system used by billions of people on servers, supercomputers, smartphones, and increasingly on desktops. Your PC does not have to become obsolete on Microsoft's schedule. Your passwords do not have to be photographed by software you did not ask for. Your machine does not have to require a $1,500 replacement just to stay secure. And your computing life does not have to be lived inside an ecosystem that tightens its grip with every annual update cycle. There is a door. It has always been there. And right now, in 2026, it is wider open than it has ever been. The only question is whether you walk through it before the pressure on the other side makes the decision for you. Because Microsoft is counting on most people waiting too long to think about it. Waiting until the forced upgrade, waiting until the security warning, waiting until the choice is simply between spending money you did not plan to spend or running a machine that is no longer safe. You do not have to wait. You can boot a Linux USB drive tonight. It costs nothing. It takes 30 minutes. And you might find, the way millions of people have already found, that the computer you thought you needed to replace is actually perfectly fine, that it runs faster than it has in years, that nobody is taking screenshots of your screen, that the settings are yours to control, that the software is free, that the machine is, for the first time in a long time, actually completely yours. That is not a small thing. That is everything